In 1288, 60,000 Mongols burned on the Bach Dang River. This was the Red Cliff of Southeast Asia, the epic finale of 30 years of war between Dai Viet and the Mongol Empire, Vietnam's greatest military victory, and one of the most misunderstood in history. Stay to the end and discover how this impossible triumph was won. After months of stalemate and hunger, Togun believed he was about to receive an unexpected gift.
Why are you surrendering only now? Dai Viet's surrender at this moment means nothing, and it's hardly believable.
Actually, it's simple. We waited for this moment so we would have the greatest leverage when negotiating with you.
You have no leverage. We have continuously pushed back your armies, killed your great generals, and taken many of your fortresses.
You were out of supplies. We know your plan this time was a war of attrition. Your massive fleet of supply ships proved that. Those stores would have fed you for 6 months, but once they are gone, your strategy collapses. Now you are counting down the days until starvation. I have seen the rations in your camps. We are a small state that in any case prefers peace with a great power like the UN. This is the best deal you will get. We can discuss the terms.
Very well. Let us hear the conditions of your capitulation.
But what seemed like a gift soon revealed itself as tragedy. Togun had been deceived by Dai Viet. While he grew complacent, imagining that peace terms were within reach, the suicide squads of Dai Viet infiltrated the Yuan camp night after night, striking at the heart of his lifeline, their last remaining granaries. For an army already crippled by famine, these supplies were their only chance of survival. And now the flames consumed them. Driven to madness, Togun raged as his soldiers starved. Worse still, the raids did not stop. They came again and again, denying the Mongols any chance to rest. At last, the empire that had crushed half the world found itself with no choice but to retreat. But are you curious? How did Dai Viet drive the Mongols into such a desperate corner? Let us go back to the weeks before and uncover the plan that set the stage for this moment.
Why are you so certain they will believe our false surrender? Because they have no choice. They are forced into a position where they must accept it. But have you thought, what happens when they return?
That is the true danger. If they march home safely, they will come back stronger than before.
Then we shall have no peace until their army is crushed. Only after we destroy them completely will negotiations have meaning.
A part of this is their vengeance, as the Mongol has desecrated the tombs of Tran ancestors.
We will not negotiate until their army lies in ruin.
2 months earlier, after the victory at Van Don,
The triumph at Van Don fit perfectly into our design.
The war returns to a battle of attrition.
The enemy still does not know of Zhang Wenhu's defeat. That is our advantage. Within 1 month, I will corner every piece on their board.
near Thap Sun, a seemingly small skirmish erupted, yet its consequences would ripple across the entire campaign, shaping the fate of the war itself.
Strike enough, then pull back.
The clash with Tran Hung Dao left Omar uneasy. He feared the grain fleet had been ambushed, and so he lingered, waiting, guarding Jiang Wenhu's supplies at Thap Son. A month slipped away in anxious watchfulness for a convoy that no longer existed. Meanwhile, Tran Hung Dao's stand at Thap Son did more than hold the line. It expanded Dai Viet's reach, pressing directly against Togon in Thang Long. Fearful of encirclement and the loss of his supply route, Togon withdrew in haste to Ban Keep. Not long after, Omar too fell back to Ban Keep to rejoin him. Thus, more than a month was wasted for the Mongols, drained of strength, drained of resources, while Tran Hung Dao grew stronger than ever. His next move was bold, seizing Chukdong. Together with Thap Son, it formed two blades at the Mongols' throat, threatening to sever their only escape by sea. In this grand game of encirclement, Tran Hung Dao had triumphed. Every path for the enemy was sealed. Unless the Mongols dared a reckless assault, their fate was already written: starvation or retreat.
Now we must split into two routes to withdraw from Dai Viet. And surely they will ambush us.
Problem is, we do not know how many men they have, nor where those ambushes lie.
I believe that even if they muster all their forces, they can only strike at one of us at a time. They will concentrate their forces to destroy one of us in order to gain leverage in negotiations.
Your wing will face far greater risk than mine.
That is exactly what they want us to think. Perhaps they will strike against you.
Send a cavalry detachment to ride with me.
Very well, the fighting will take place at a narrow stretch of river. It will be most unfavorable for you.
My first priority is to reach open water. Once I make East Sea, I will meet you in Dadu.
Good luck, brother-in-arms.
And then, Togon and Omar split their forces to retreat toward Yuan, Omar taking the waterways toward Bach Dang, while Togon marched north by land. But in Dai Viet, a counter-plan was being carefully calculated.
Their route is fairly predictable, which makes our work easier to plan. Yet because it is predictable, they will be far more cautious. They will surely send scouts ahead to locate our stake fields and ambush points before committing their columns. We must force a cautious enemy into a trap, make them overthink their safety until they walk right into our snare.
Bach Dang is a stretch of river. If I were them, I would plant stakes in the most treacherous bend of the river, where stakes were driven long ago, a place that has shredded armies that tried to pass before. Do not assume large ships make you safe.
I have several hypotheses about where they might have set their stake fields. We will always send scouts ahead to probe the channel and keep cavalry ready to strike any ambushers that appear.
We will combine fire tactics with the stake field. The stakes are meant to fix them in place, to hold their fleet fast where we can strike. When the tide falls and the water drops, those stakes will rise like a great thorned barrier. The field is prepared, Yet the difficulty lies in timing the ebb of the tide. If the enemy passes at the wrong hour, the stakes will be useless, and our ambush will fail. With the guidance of local people who know the tides, we have pinpointed the exact hour to lie in wait. The stake field is set at the choke, where they are forced to sail. There is no alternate route for them to avoid it. When their ships struck the stakes, their first reflex was to flee ashore. What awaited them on the banks was no mercy, but our infantry lying silent in ambush. The very troops forged by 30 years of patient preparation and hunger for this hour. Tens of thousands moved as one thought, ready to die for Dai Viet. As for the cavalry escorting the convoy, their route is simple and forced. Every road they must take crosses the bridges we can break. What we can build, we can destroy. Togon may still have an army too large to ring completely with our forces. Now the aim is unforgiving and absolute to annihilate the entire enemy host here.
So my fight to survive begins in earnest. 31 miles from the Dao River to the East Sea, so short on a map. Yet every mile feels endless with danger pressing close. If I make it back to Dadu alive, I will return 100-fold with vengeance for what was taken. That promise steals me now. These narrow tributaries bite like hidden mouths. Ambushes wait in those side channels exactly where our enemies would want us to pass. They know our route. They have set traps along the way, and they have blocked the other branches of the river. We could force our way through, but I fear the cost would be even greater. More ambushes waiting ahead. Of course, they funnel us where they choose. Why else would cavalry scouts be nowhere to be seen? Silence there smells of disaster. I am walking into a trap, and I walk alone. The worst thing for a navy moving by night is the rain of fire from both banks. A tactic meant to turn dark water into a furnace. It is even more deadly in these tight, twisting passes. We must not rush. Haste will scatter men and doom the convoy, so we will move slow, measured, and watch every shadow. Survive this night, and the tale of their arrogance will be written in ash and broken masts.
April 9th, 1288. After weeks of weary marching and rowing, Omar finally reached the stretch of the Bach Dang River where the ambush lay in wait. Exactly as planned, the Mongol fleet found no other path to take. At that moment, Tran Hung Dao's masterpiece began to unfold. The legendary naval battle was about to begin, a clash destined to be remembered for 1,000 years. The navy of Dai Viet lay hidden in every branch of the river, waiting for Omar's armada to pass. Then the warships of Mongol emerged in defiance, as if to send one final message: the last battle is here. General Nguyen Quai's squadron sailed out to challenge, clashing briefly with the Mongols. Then, as so many times before, the Dai Viet ships broke away, retreating downriver as if in fear. The vast Mongol fleet pressed forward into the broad waters, a channel wide and open, seemingly perfect for their massive ships to surge and crush all resistance. Just a little further, and they would reach the sea, freedom, and survival. It was then, at that fateful hour, that Omar gave the order to surge ahead. At that very moment, the hidden navy of Dai Viet burst from the side channels, flanking the Mongol fleet. For the first time, the full strength of Dai Viet's river forces struck all at once, and the invaders reeled in shock. Mongols had three choices of retreat, but one was already sealed by great Tran warships, lashed together across the river like an iron wall. Forced to take the broader channel, they sailed straight into their doom. As the tide receded, the first ships crashed upon the stake field, impaled and trapped. The vessels behind slammed into them, piling chaos upon chaos, until the river became a tangle of shattered hulls. Elite commandos of Dai Viet dove beneath the waves. Boring holes into the enemy hulls. While archers rained fire arrows onto the decks. Yet the deadliest blows came from the great engines on both banks, massive fire projectiles that turned the waterway into a furnace. In desperation, Mongol troops tried to leap ashore from the few ships still free. But every landing was met with ambush and driven back in blood. The Bach Dang River had become a river of fire, and still it was not enough. The Tran Navy unleashed fire rafts packed with straw and oil, pushing them into the jammed fleet. The river burned red, a living hell from which no escape remained. By dawn, the victory of Dai Viet was complete. Survivors were hunted down along the banks, the rout lasting into the next day. And in the north, as Togon led his army through the Noibang Pass, he too bled. Misled by false intelligence, he sought to avoid an ambush by taking the narrow road, only to march straight into the trap set by Tran Hung Dao. Though the defenders were few, they wielded the mountains themselves as weapons, cutting down far greater numbers of Mongols. jaws of the trap had closed, both by land and by river. The mightiest empire of the world had been broken.
Looking at the overall strategy after the victory at Van Don, we believe Tran Hung Dao played the war like a game of chess, using stillness to control movement with no wasted moves. He didn't make many moves, but every time he deployed his forces, the enemy was pushed deeper into a deadlock. When he marched to Thapsan, he threatened 2 key river branches flowing to the sea, forcing the enemy to stay stuck in defense. Too cramped to counterattack, yet too scared of falling into his trap. When he guarded the sea gate, he forced Togon to abandon Thang Long and retreat into Van Keep. The attack on Omar was a form of intimidation that forced Omar to waste a whole month waiting for Zhang Wenhu, while Togon had to stay locked down at Van Keep. It was a small move, but it stopped them from expanding their foothold while their food supplies kept draining away. When he moved his troops from Tan Hoa to Chukdong, he drove another nail in their coffin, cutting off the escape route and expansion route of the Mongol navy. When he pretended to surrender and ambush the Mongol supply depot, that was the final nail in the coffin, destroying their last lifeline. That was checkmate. The famous Bach Dang battle followed, but it was only possible because of the brilliant strategy beforehand that created the chance for such a spectacular tactical victory. If we compare it to chess, the Mongols were smart, seasoned like grandmasters, but Tran Hung Dao slowly cornered them until they were checkmated, helpless to move. Let's talk about the tactics at the Bach Dang battle and the erroneous simplification. There are many misunderstandings about the main cause of casualties in the Bach Dang victory. The Mongol army did not suffer major casualties from crashing into stakes. In fact, the number of ships damaged by stakes was only a few leading ships. So what role did the stakes really play? Before answering that, we need to look at the 2 key factors of the victory at Bach Dang: incendiary attacks and mastery of the terrain. Incendiary attacks from flaming arrows, firebolts and firestones were launched from both riverbanks. Imagine huge wooden ships packed tightly together, like setting an entire neighborhood of wooden houses on fire. The use of terrain was about mastering the riverbanks, side channels, current flows, and especially the timing of the tides. turning the whole area into a perfect trap. The stake field was part of this terrain-based tactics. The stakes weren't meant to sink ships by piercing them. They formed a natural death trap, a barrier that locked the Mongol fleet in place. This blockade was absolutely crucial. Without it, the whole plan would have collapsed, because there'd be no way to keep the Mongols from escaping the incendiary attacks. Why were the Mongols so confident? Because their massive warships could easily overpower the smaller Dai Viet boats in open water. They could ride their weight and the tides to break through and pull back, something the lighter ships had no way to stop. Imagine hundreds of container ships charging straight at you. You might set a few on fire, but most would plow right through. The stakes changed that. Thousands of giant underwater spears that stopped the fleet in its tracks. Even the strongest ship that slipped past one row would get caught on the next. And once stuck, it would be ripped apart by dozens of allied boats swarming around it. So the Mongol ships were jammed together, completely stuck. They couldn't even move, let alone turn around. In modern terms, this was a traffic jam on the river. And when you have hundreds of ships trapped in one spot, what did Dai Viet do? They rained fire from above and from both riverbanks. The flames spread quickly. Even if the Mongols tried to resist, they were already in a hopelessly vulnerable position, like standing in an open field in modern warfare while your enemy is firing from cover. The most logical move for the Mongols would have been to pull the ships that weren't yet stuck to the shore and launch a landing attack. But of course, Dai Viet had anticipated that and ambushed those marines too. The Mongols were now trapped in a situation where they couldn't advance, couldn't strike back, and the more they struggled, the worse it got. Every moment that passed meant another part of the fleet was going up in flames. This was checkmate, no escape, just a river of fire. Even if Scipio Africanus himself came back to life, he might have had no way out. At this point, it was certain death. If time could rewind, maybe Omar could have changed the outcome with a different decision earlier on. What do you think? If you were Omar, what would you have done? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Now let's talk about the variables in this strategy. The success of the Bach Dang plan was actually quite risky because it depended on so many things lining up perfectly. What if Omar had passed through that stretch of river earlier or later, missing the exact timing of the tide? What if he had chosen a different river branch, then avoid the stakes trap field? And there were dozens more of these what-if questions. The most critical factor was this: timing the ambush perfectly with the tide. We believe Dai Viet used a push-and-pull method. If the enemy was moving too slowly, they hit from behind, forcing the ships ahead to surge forward. If the enemy moved too quickly, they would block and fall back gradually to slow them down. By doing this, they could control the enemy's pace, making sure they arrived at the battlefield exactly when the tide turned. There were two critical moments they had to control: the moment the enemy entered the ambush zone, and the moment they sailed into the underwater stake field. Both had to be timed with absolute precision. The second key factor was psychological warfare. The Mongols knew there might be an ambush, and Dai Viet knew the Mongols knew. So they planted multiple fake traps and decoy stake fields, creating noise, and forcing the Mongols to keep guessing where the real danger was. And that's why, when the real trap finally struck, it hit at the exact moment when the enemy felt most confident and full of hope. There is an important question. Why did the Mongol general fall into the trap? What was going through his mind? Ambushes in history are often misunderstood. They can make the losing side seem foolish. But honestly, no general is naive or blindly overconfident. Even today, someone managing just 5 people has to think carefully. A man commanding tens of thousands in the ancient world would have thought 10 times harder. So why did they still get caught? Why did the Mongols fall for the one at Bach Dang? When Omar was trapped, it came after a month of constant tension. Moving carefully, bracing for ambushes, reacting to false alarms, trying to defend his fleet inside narrow river branches at night and at terrain that clearly worked against him. When he finally broke through to a wider open branch near the sea, almost at safety, it felt like the final step after 1,000 grueling steps. This last step looked easier than everything before. The wide river seemed like an advantage. The rising tide seemed like an advantage. Even if he suspected a trap, he probably thought, the only way out is to smash through it. And the truth is, his fleet was strong enough to do that. He even sent scouts to check the river's width and saw no sign of stakes. He did everything a capable commander could have done. So saying he lost because he was arrogant isn't fair. He lost because his enemy pushed him into a situation where he had no choice but to fall.
Let's summarize Dai Viet's 3 wars against the Mongols. We see the 3 wars between Dai Viet and the Mongol Empire as a story of military growth for both sides. Let's break it down by stages. Stage 1 is the year 1258. At the Battle of Bin Le Nguyen, Dai Viet appeared overconfident. They dared to face the Mongols head-on open ground, likely because they had a much larger army and even war elephants. Dai Viet learned they could not fight the Mongols with conventional tactics. The Mongols learned how difficult Southeast Asia's terrain and logistics would be. Stage 2 is the year 1285. By this stage, Dai Viet had mastered guerrilla warfare. The Mongols came to realize that quick blitz-style campaigns would not be enough. Stage 3 is the year 1288. This was the peak of both sides' evolution. Dai Viet now launched fully integrated campaigns, combining psychological warfare, terrain mastery, and riverine combat. The Mongols countered with a much simpler but highly effective approach. A near-perfect logistics system prepared for a long war. But Dai Viet still won, because they adapted faster. The Dai Viet versus Mongol wars were not only life or death struggles, but also a sort of brutal martial arts exchange. After each clash, both sides went home, refined their strategies, and returned stronger. In an age where failing to adapt meant destruction, the Mongols were the fastest learning army in the world. But ironically, Dai Viet, in that moment of history, learned even faster. And they dealt a blow that would haunt the Mongol Empire for decades to come.
How common was the scorched earth strategy that Dai Viet used? Actually, it was very common. The core logic of scorched earth is simple: deny the enemy access to resources. In many cases, it was a standard step in warfare. There are some classic examples: the Scythians against the Persians, the Assyrians against the Neo-Assyrians, Fabius Maximus against Hannibal Barca, the Byzantines against the Arab world, William the Conqueror against the Anglo-Saxons, and even the Mongols themselves suffered from scorched earth tactics during their campaign against Hungary, 1241 to 1242. They knew very well how this strategy worked. So, saying Dai Viet won purely because of scorched earth would be inaccurate. It was a common and familiar tactic to any experienced commander. What made Dai Viet stand out was how they spiced it up. They didn't just use it as a standalone move, but built it into a chain of interlocking strategies, turning it into a devastating combo. It was this integration, not just the tactic itself, that made it so unexpectedly effective and caught the Mongols off guard. To dive deeper into this topic, we'd need to break it down with multiple case studies, which we can explore in future videos.
Let's talk about the tragedy of Togon and Oma. Let's talk about Togon first. We couldn't find much about him, only scattered notes that he was the 9th prince, son of Bayujin of the 4th Ordo, who held his own authority in Dali and was entrusted with leading 2 invasions of Dai Viet. From these fragments, we can guess that Kublai Khan placed high expectations on him, not as an heir, of course. The designated successor was Zhenjin, and even after Zhenjin's death, the throne went to Zhenjin's son, Temur. But still, commanding nearly 1 million mixed troops across 2 invasions shows that Togon was given a rare chance to prove himself. And despite his crushing failure in 1285, Kublai trusted him enough to give him another shot. That alone is remarkable, considering Marco Polo noted Kublai had at least 47 sons. The fact that Togon kept getting opportunities suggests he was treated with far more favor than most of his brothers. It also partly explains why there's so little record of him in official history. With such great expectations, Togon's defeat would have deeply wounded Kublai, so much that he disowned his own son afterward, and traces of Togon may have been deliberately erased from the records. Togon passed away 13 years after the Dai Viet campaign. That battlefield became the grave of his career. the end of a golden future for one of Kublai's favorite sons. Now, about Omar. There are two accounts of his background. One claims he was Tangut, another says he was Khwarezmian. Even the 29th generation descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, whichever version you believe, two things are clear: he was noble and he was from the Middle East, not Mongol. To us, that partly explains his arrogance and brutality during the war with Dai Viet. As we mentioned in an earlier video, the Mongol Empire was built on meritocracy. For a noble to repeatedly fail was already a serious mark against their worth, and this was especially critical for a commander who wasn't ethnically Mongol like Omar. Perhaps in Omar's mind, the war against Dai Viet was a fight for his very survival. Those defeats were humiliations so deep that they turned into hatred that sank into his bones. And history shows hatred like that always calls forth the same in return.
An interesting topic I would like to talk about is the unique emperor internship system in history. The Tran dynasty of Dai Viet had a fascinating system for training the future emperors. They allowed two emperors in charge at the same time. One called the Supreme Emperor and the other the Reigning Emperor. You can think of it like this. The Supreme Emperor was the chairman of the board, while the current emperor was the CEO. When the new emperor first took the throne, the chairman would personally train him on real governance. And if the CEO turned out to be ineffective after some time, the chairman could remove him and appoint a new one. In reality, the Supreme Emperor held the real power, but the plan was always to transfer authority once the new emperor became experienced enough, gradually. When the Supreme Emperor finally felt confident that the new emperor was fully trained and ready, the transition had gone smoothly. He would leave politics entirely and become a monk. This system hit at least 4 birds with one stone. It ensured that the new emperor wouldn't make reckless decisions. And even if he did, the Supreme Emperor acted as a safety net to ensure the country's proper functioning. It removed the risk of power struggles. As long as the Supreme Emperor still stood behind the throne, no other princes dared to attempt a coup. By the time he stepped away, the emperor would already have enough power and experience to stand on his own. It kept the government running without delays, especially in times of looming war. The highest decision maker was still present, with a trainee leader learning by his side. It boosted efficiency. The two emperors could split tasks. The younger emperor could handle diplomacy and public appearances, while the Supreme Emperor focused on long-term strategies. From world history, a few other places have also had similar dual emperor setups, like Japan during the Insei period, the Byzantine Empire, or the Ottoman Empire, with the role of the Valide Sultan. But only Dai Viet and Japan turned it into a fully systemized, multi-generational emperor training model. Pretty fascinating, isn't it?